Hello to you all, and a very, very warm welcome to the Southover Gallery on what has turned out to be a beautiful spring evening. Tonight we are celebrating International Women's Day and the fantastic Peggy Angus. But I did also want to highlight the original lady of this house, whom I must concede to, the fabulous Deirdre Bland. Deirdre created her beloved Southover Gallery from home in 1973, and we believe it to be one of Lewes's very first art galleries. She was in her 60s when she decided to take a leap of faith, follow her intuition, and start something new. A life well lived and an open heart meant that Deirdre knew pretty much everyone. She brought together prominent artists of the day, from Duncan Grant and Quentin Bell to Mary Fedden, and even Carolyn Trant, who sits on our panel tonight. The Welsh Dragon wallpaper you will have seen in the room opposite was made by her friend Peggy Angus sometime in the mid-80s, and this was the first piece of the puzzle about our home's rich history. Next, we discovered the old weather-beaten sign in the shed, and squeals could be heard all over Southover. Ever since, Matt and I have been on a mission to reawaken the gallery, which has been sleeping for some 38 years. I want to do some very quick shout-outs because we've got far more interesting people to hear from. So Polly, Deirdre's granddaughter, where are you? There you are. I want to say thank you for your continued support and for becoming a very good friend. Kate, where is Kate? Who turned our old gallery sign into branding that felt like home. I want to say a massive thank you to you. Emma Carlow for creating our beautiful Peggy invite for tonight and for your support throughout this event. Graham and Finn for tonight's amazing film and photography duo. Tom and Hannah from Winklestone Vineyard for being our drinks partner this evening. Sophie and Lone Kitchen for your gorgeous plates of food. Sorry, it's quite long. Amy of Hamsey Bell for your warmth, kindness and your flowers. And Dom, he used to, I found out this morning, used to visit the gallery as a 7-year-old, and he brought his childhood sweetheart to show off about art. Thank you for speedily restoring our beloved sign outside. We really appreciate it. Rowena and Alex from Rosa Magazine, thank you for stepping in at the last minute to partner on our event and to share tonight with the wider arts community. And finally, to our amazing panelists, Carolyn Trant, Sarah Lawrence, Diana Hall and Tanya Harrod, and of course the amazing Bee. Thank you for being here this evening and for giving up your time for a very special occasion. And I will now hand over to the fabulous artist Emma Carlow, Lewes's very own, to say a few words.
Hello, I'm Emma. I just wanted to say a few words about this evening. I don't have to introduce you to Peggy Angus because if you don't know her, you will by the end of the evening. But I did want to introduce briefly Beatrice Uprichard, who is our chair tonight. I've known Bea ever since she was born. Yes, she's great. And her mum and I, Diana, were at art college together, and we've remained the best of friends ever since. And without the melting pot of an art college, Diana and I wouldn't have met. However, I hope she'd agree that when we met, sharing our experiences that have been handed down to us by our grandmothers and mothers, such sewing, knitting, whatever, we learnt far more from each other than we ever did at Bristol or Brighton. Sorry if anybody here taught us. So I was delighted when Bea decided to go and study textiles at Manchester School of Art, where she specialised in weaving. And in her final year, perhaps reflecting on growing up in a creative community and her time at Manchester, her dissertation explored the idea. Actually, I've written it down because I am actually quoting her dissertation right now. She explored the value of a living, oral and practical continuity of education as opposed to institutional and qualification-centric education. Of course, you can't study this area for long without turning your attention to Peggy Angus and Ethel, I'm going to get this pronounced wrong, Ethel Mary? Mary. Especially if you come from Sussex. So these two women and the creative communities they built around them became the focus of Bee's study. What I think is so interesting is that a young woman like Bee clearly respects and understands the value of Peggy's creative life. And I'm quoting her again. She seeks to bring these ideas into the 21st century, and she recognises how they might inform our future. So, while researching Peggy, Bee inevitably met Carolyn Trant. So when I visited this gallery for the first time before Christmas and met Charlie standing in front of Peggy's fantastic wallpaper, chatting to Carolyn about a possible Peggy evening, Bee's name was mentioned within a nanosecond. So I'm very glad she could make it here. So I'm going to hand over to Bee and the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. That's way too kind. And thank you so much for everyone for coming. What an amazing way to celebrate International Women's Day. Thank you so much, Charlie, for hosting us as well. So I'm Bee. I'm a weaver, a designer, maker, and most importantly, a massive Peggy nerd. I grew up in Lewes and came across Peggy, as Emma said, whilst I was studying at Manchester. I decided to write my dissertation on her and Ethel Mary and the value of women-centric creative communities. I think the way in which I tracked down Carolyn is characteristic of Peggy's legacy. I began by stalking Carolyn online, which led me to find her blog, and after lots of scrolling I found a picture of Carolyn and Emma standing next to each other, exhibiting together. I think you can still feel Peggy's community spirit here in Lewes, and clearly her well-known habit of connecting people remains. I use Peggy in my dissertation often to demonstrate points I don't think she even meant to make, about feminism and bureaucracy, for example, almost deifying her. And whilst Carolyn had her work cut out for her, reminding me of the actual facts, isn't it amazing that despite never having known Peggy, she ignites my imagination so much and embodies so many ideas about life and art that still resonate today. I'm going to stop talking now and invite my lovely panelists to introduce themselves. Maybe if you could just tell everyone who you are and talk a little bit about your relationship with Peggy and the impact she had on your life and your work. Is that all right? Carolyn, you go ahead.
Well, I think a lot of people here know how well I knew Peggy. She just had a massive influence on me from the age of 12. I was really lucky to be taught by Peggy from the age of 12. Then I just sort of glided into, that's why I'm in Lewes, printing down here, looking after her grandchildren, and then working for her in London. I was supposed to be being a painter at the Slade, but actually the best education I had continued from school, then didn't teach you anything at the Slade in the late 60s. Except I think you and Eugley told me how to put rabbit skin glue on a canvas, but I painted an egg tempera anyway. So. Powder paint, which is what we used to at school, I was happy with powder paint. And then I was printing wallpaper at night. And then, yes, the relationship continued, and she did ask me to write the book about her. I don't think I would ever have thought of writing a book otherwise. But I just felt, she was a great believer in oral history, so I just believed that I really had to do it. And, I've got the book with me, and if people want to see it afterwards, it's sort of an exhibition in a box. It's so Peggy, because it's sort of not a proper book. It's kind of, you open it up and there's all this ephemera, and there's a CD of her singing, and there's all this stuff. So, all the invites to parties. So, I absolutely agree with what Bee has said about this quality of inspiring people. Of course, she's not the only young woman who's approached me about writing about Peggy, and that is really, really affirming, because I felt that, and it's just really, really good to find other people are getting that, and young men too. So, yeah, I'll let the others explain their relationship with her.
Tanya, go ahead.
I'm Tanya Harrod. I came across Peggy 3 years before she died, so rather late on in time, and I was in the middle of writing a book called The Crafts in Britain in the 20th Century that attempted to look at what happened to the arts and crafts movement after it was sort of largely thought to have dissipated or gone away, even when it kind of lost touch, perhaps with architecture after the First World War. And of course, writing this book made me realise what extraordinary groups of women there were whose careers had perhaps been rather overlooked, and the kinds of organisations they set up, which were very informal, and that was important, and that related back to the arts and crafts movement. Anyway, I wrote an article about Peggy, and then she is in the book, and I got a little bit drawn into her world in Camden, her amazing studio, and somewhere, well, it's in the British Library now, there's a tape, but it was before I learnt about how to do oral history, and in fact Peggy's showing me lots of images, but of course we can't see them on the tape. So it's but it gives a sense of her buoyancy and also her moments of sort of sorrow, so I value this tape enormously. But yes, for me she was an extraordinary, I felt I'd made an amazing discovery, not realising that we were all I was being very clever.
And then you kindly wrote an introduction to this book.
I did, that was a great
very
honour.
Wonderful.
Yes.
No, it was an honour
Yes.
for me. Tanya wrote a wonderful
And we did get a
introduction.
wonderful photograph of Peggy, because the article was in Crafts magazine. At that point they had a great photographer called Fee McGee, and it's a really beautiful photograph of Peggy standing in front of wallpapers hanging down. But, so
Amazing. Thank you. Di, do you want to go ahead?
Hello, I'm Di Hall, and I met Peggy in the 70s. We were having an opera in our barn, and we Joe Staines was a student at Sussex University, and he came back on Wednesday night and said, "Oh, we've just done our first performance, but we've only got 2 more nights. Can we come and do the Beggar's Opera in the barn?" So we cleared the barn out and said, "Of course, come." Rang up various friends in Lewes and said, "Come, we're having an opera in the barn on Sunday afternoon, but please bring a friend." And so we knew the Closkett Kennedys and had asked them, and so Janet and Till brought Peggy. And at the time we were having a new kitchen, and I needed floor tiles, and I hadn't been able to find any. So I think in the interval I was talking to Peggy, of course, had this wonderful, she just inspired you on the spot. And so she said of course she would design me some tiles. And so a few weeks later she came up with a design, and I've met her quite a few times in between and had a real connection with her. My father was a farmer and I had only had cow records as a child, so the inspiration was just amazing. I think my mother had left when I was 5, and so for me she was my surrogate mother. But the design that she did for me was a 1950s geometric design, which I was really disappointed with. I didn't want triangles all over this new floor. So I was so disappointed. I thought I had a real connection. Anyhow, I went over to Furlong's, found one of her wallpaper books, and in that there was a lovely Celtic design, and it was a repeat. Every 4 tiles repeated itself, 2 tiles deep, and I just thought, okay, we could have a border, that goes under some of the furniture, over and under, and so I told her that I really couldn't cope with the geometrics, and that why don't we have this border? And she looked at me and said, "Not really, not a Celtic design in a little farmhouse in Sussex." So she then said, "But let's do some bits from the Bear Tapestry." I was happy. I just, I glowed. And those are the sort of characters that she designed.
Wow.
And it was, again, in blocks of 4. Then she had a friend called Chris Stevens who lived in Long Ashton outside Bristol, and he had printed a few tiles for her but had never done a whole floor. So he said he would do my floor, and he did with oh goodness, can't remember, from Young Observer, who wrote Young Observer, Tim Hunkin. And so after it was wonderful. The floor was an absolute delight. But so Chris turned round to me afterwards and said, we've got the only floor like it. He was going off to Malawi to start a pottery. Why don't I print floor tiles? Wonderful, I thought. I had 4 children. The oldest twins were 5.
Oh.
How was I going to cope? I didn't have any time. But it was such a joy, and I just so needed something for myself. But I had the vineyard, a farm, and children, and so I had everything, but I needed something for myself. It was just amazing. So Peggy and I went down to Long Ashton for a weekend's course. Easy when you see somebody else do it, and quickly. So he got polystyrene, and then we cut it out of polystyrene and manganese dioxide. So these were that was from that at the time. So it started, and I came home. The kiln was I didn't. But Peggy supplied me with a kiln, but the water's different. Everything was different. So I took a few months working out how to do it. Then Anne Kennedy came and we did the first floor, and it was lovely. There was one mistake. I forgot that the tiles had nibs on for spacers, and so the design was wonderful where it started, but when it got to the far end, it didn't quite fit. But anyhow, I think it's still alive, the floor. And so one floor went into 2 floors, and it just expanded. Some lovely people up in Yorkshire, the Sutcliffes, had some behind their Rayburn, and they've just moved back to Dorset. I've come from Dorset today, and they have got the original tiles behind their Rayburn still. So it's really nice having. Just such an inspirer. And I think so many people in Lewes, well, around, it's far beyond Lewes, have been inspired. And she really should have a great exhibition of all those that she has inspired. And that we've grown. I mean, she changed my life. I just have to say a really, really big thank you to her. It's been amazing.
Lovely.
I'm Sarah Lawrence, and I printed wallpaper for Peggy. I think I started in the late 1970s. I had 2 small children. The youngest had just started school, so I would take them to school, collect any shopping and gallon cans of paraffin and buckets of paint and frozen chickens and things in a rucksack, and get the train to Glynde, and then walk from Glynde across the A27 and up to Furlongs, and then print as much as I could before I had to go and get the train back again. And sometimes, like in the Terza painting, I'd see the train going past in the distance. And after this happened a couple of times, Peggy painted me a sign saying Lewes on it, so I could hitchhike back. And I've looked for that. I can't find it. I hope it still exists somewhere. Anyway, so I needed to do some work to earn some money. And it was quite hard work, you can imagine. It was very cold and damp, and you had these long lengths of wallpaper. First they had to be painted with the background colour, and then the blocks had to be, like Di was saying about getting them accurate so that it met properly and joined up all the way across. And I've got a bit here from the design Peggy did for Blind Place Library, which was 5 blocks, 7-inch square, and yes. So you can see that each of these heraldic ones only turns up every 10 blocks. So you had to get them all in the right order so that when they were on the wall, they went in nice diagonals across the wall. I made one mistake out of 24 rolls or something.
Wow.
But, yeah. And so it was very well organised in a very primitive way. There was a long room on the side of what had been Dick the Shepherd's side of the house, and it had battens across both walls above head height with notches cut in it, and across these went bamboo poles, and on the bamboo poles were plastic drain pipe sections. So as you printed the wallpaper, when you'd got enough, you hung it up in great loops over these rollers so it didn't get creases in it. And then you had to move it across the other side of the room to do the next one. And there was, I mean, it was done with emulsion paint, which I think Peggy kept quite secret at the time, but so you had to paint the background and you had to water it down slightly so it moved properly. And there was a cast iron bowl, which I think she must have found in the farmyard. It looked very agricultural, and it had a bit of string around the rim and a bit of string tied across the middle to wipe the extra paint off the brush. So you'd hold the block, lino block, paint on the emulsion and then put it down, roller it really hard with a dry roller on the back, and then do the next one. And with something like that where you've got 5 different blocks and one only turning up every 10, they would dry out and clog up. So I had to be terribly careful to work quite fast, and then at the end of a session, before I rushed off, I would have to clean them out with old toothbrush to get all the bits out. And I think the first one I printed was for Bridget Haycox, our mutual friend, which was the Cornstukes one, which is 7 inches wide, so that was 3 across. And I think there were 3 different versions of that block because it got so clogged up it had to be recut. So you could probably do a dating of wallpaper by looking at these different types of...
There are tiles still in front of 29 Grange Road. Yes, went and checked today.
Oh, right. Yeah, so outside the front door on the top of the steps.
With the haycocks as well. Yeah.
And inside that, I don't know if they still got the wallpaper.
I don't know. I didn't dare. I mean, I didn't have time.
Must go and ask them.
The doctor's surgery, the St Andrew's doctor's surgery.
Yes, they've got some outside. Yes, bottom of Station Street and going round towards the Charleston. There's a St Andrew himself.
Yes,
it was in tiles.
Tim Carter's mother commissioned it.
Oh, right, that's the Dr. Carter. Yes.
Yeah.
So I wondered, since it's International Women's Day, I wondered if I could ask Carolyn, would I be right in my impression that she had quite a liberating effect on other women, being she was, from my impression, she was quite bold, playful, unconventional, not really what women were supposed to be like at the time. Am I right in thinking that?
Yes. Yes, she was. But I mean, interestingly, she was always on about young men because her son died very tragically of epilepsy when he was 21, and she always said he was sending, after going off to meeting a medium by chance in Indonesia, he always said to her he would always send young men. So actually she found young men quite useful as well. We did the wallpapers. I wouldn't say she was a feminist, would you? Well, she was, but not in a
She was in a different
ideological
more
way.
Open way. Yeah.
Yes, and I mean certainly she appealed to young men as well. So this is interesting that you've got this idea of passing on knowledge, but it was as much to young men. I mean, I think the great thing about us, who are, born in the 50s, or just at the beginning. By the 60s, everything was beginning to happen, and we were breaking out of that restrictive. I mean, I was quite sort of working class
was an
person, but a
amazing
lot of
time,
people came from
with
sort of quite
very
nice
open
homes, and
very,
Peggy was just outrageous. So that sort of permission to
Yeah.
be free and outrageous, and she would pick people up just in cafes around Camden. People would be drawn to her, young men, and come and talk, and then she'd say, "Well, I need somebody to do this, dear boy." Did you call us dear girl?
Everybody boy.
Yes,
boy.
boy.
Yeah. But actually, I never got called boy, which I was really sort of quite flattered, because I didn't want to go and collect sticks for her, but nobody would take a bunch of flowers to her. They would go and print something for her, or be useful.
Yes.
I think.
Actually, it was quite
Kindling,
interesting
yes.
in old age after I'd written
Because
the book.
no electricity.
No
and-
one cold tap.
Yeah.
No loo.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Quite, Olive Cook wrote a wonderful piece for Interiors about calling it a test of friendship.
That's nice,
Because she had
yeah.
these amazing parties at which, for us young, we were meeting all these. When I look back and think of the people I met at those parties, didn't realise who I was meeting, particularly modernist architects.
Yeah.
Because she knew, her son-in-law was an architect, and he's just died actually. But I mean, he was amazing because he really absorbed her ideas. I mean, he went off to be architect for the Shetlands. There was a wonderful Richard Gibson, wonderful obituary of him just a couple of weeks ago, and about all this, her incredible sense of community, but also of art being important. It's not aesthetics, it's not about doing things beautifully, it's about, when you were talking about, Tim Carter's wife asking, she wanted people both for the wallpapers and for the tiles. It had to be relevant to the place,
and commissioned,
and they had to, the patron had to come up with what, something relevant as to why they wanted it. And I think
But also she was very supportive. I remember a wonderful story where she'd paid for a young man who was a very good woodworker to go on a course, maybe at West Dean or somewhere like that, to make a small harp, because Peggy wanted a harp. And this man was so good, he managed to make 2 harps during this course. So Peggy had one, and he had a new career.
Yes.
And I mean, that's just brilliant,
Absolutely
isn't it?
amazing.
Well, she gave me a kiln, so
Yes.
that we
Yes.
could
Similar,
print,
yes.
we could print the tiles.
Yes.
It's-
interesting.
Yeah.
And then Tim Hunkin, who we talked about, he used to do in the Observer, he did these little sort of, and he makes amazing automata, which are now we're all on the pier in Southwold.
Yes.
But she, in Camden, she then started, the Labour government was forced to put, because she'd fought for her studio to be, the old ones were knocked down, and they were, they were sort of council studios, and you had to be a proper artist if you were living in them. Then they had to put the rent up when Margaret Thatcher came in. But then there was a sort of Camden said, well, if you do something for the community, well, none of the other artists took that up. But Peggy was right, surrounded by council flats. So she just kind of set up these classes, and people kind of shuffled in. They said, oh, I can't paint, can't do this. She'd get them knitting, she'd get them making stuff, and she got Tim Hunkin to collect up all the old furniture out of the rubbish and sort of what they call pallets and things. And he was really, so she loved to be collaborating with people.
And she would leave on a Wednesday afternoon with a rucksack on her back, saying, "I'm going to teach the oldies." Because they were younger than her.
Yes.
They were 65 and she was 76 or something.
I know.
It was lovely.
Absolutely.
It
And
was
she
lovely.
really, I went back and talked to some of them. I mean, they'd really changed her life. She got them decorating their own houses, not as in decorating, as in making extraordinary
Making
things.
things, yeah.
And then they made
Well, we
things
all
for
had
her
the paint
for furlongs.
boxes. I mean, I've still got my painted cardboard boxes with, files and
Yeah,
things in.
because she was so she was so before her time,
Yes.
ecological, and she couldn't do advertising. So the first thing you had to do is either paste stuff over, so you had to reuse a cereal box for sort of stacking
Yes.
paintbrushes in, but it had to be all the advertising gone, hand painted, hand wallpapered.
But it's lovely. And Christmas cards. I mean, we all make our Christmas cards, and the grandchildren are now doing lino, at 10 and 12. Lovely lino prints that they do. No, it was all, from Peggy. But I certainly didn't have that as a child. Brilliant.
Yeah, so you say that she changed your life as an inspirer. I was just wondering what it is you think, how did she do that for you? What was it that she did for you? If you can put your finger on it.
I don't know, I could put words, well, but she just made you believe in yourself. She said, you all have something artistic to say. And she just encouraged you to do it.
Yeah.
You know, it was just the most amazing meeting that I've ever had. And I can only say thank you, because it's gone all over the place. You know, I now make replica medieval tiles, and I got into conservation, and the world was open. The world was open. We put on musical, more music, and the children have all enjoyed it. 2 of them are here, and they're all doing it. It's lovely.
Yeah.
We can only say thank you.
I also wondered what any of you thought about what's the reason for Peggy not having such a famous reputation as some of her contemporaries like Edward Borden or Eric Ravilius or John Piper. Why isn't she remembered so widely, do you think?
Well, she didn't play the game.
I think it's so important that she kind of stayed outside institutions, and that was her strength.
Yes.
I mean, obviously she was involved with North London Collegiate, and it's interesting that a school gave her the freedom to come up with these extraordinary curricula and do special things.
It gave me the list of what the teachers had to follow. What a lucky woman you are to have gone through it. You've got the whole system.
This is the poster.
You started at the beginning and you went all the way through. I mean, what an education. Why don't they do it today?
And it's again so ahead of its time, because it was global and it was cross-cultural and it was cross. I mean, when I went to the Slade, I was supposed to be being a painter. You can't even go in the sculpture room. You can't go in here. I mean, I was brought up that art was everything from decorating a cake to painting a painting. But it was
amazing.
Very enlightened for its time.
She put that over.
And she was also pre-John Berger. I mean, when I was at Slade, John Berger was there. I was saying, I've heard all this before from Peggy, because she'd been to Russia in 1933,
that's another
seen
thing.
the banner in the Hermitage.
She came back saying, what a wonderful place. But I don't know whether she actually thought, I mean, she said women had freedom, but I don't think it was freedom. They were forced to work, weren't they?
I think she said it was a sense of freedom, because they were women sailors on the boat going over and everything. I think most people were very idealistic about it, and especially women, because you would be, wouldn't you, if you heard that it was like
this.
Our
friends Jessica and who I've done titles for, her family also went over and came back with the same sort of inspiration.
So it wasn't just Peggy, was it?
No, there were lots of visits in particularly sort of 30s.
Yes, Pearl Binder.
People came back with their sketchbooks. People dancing in the streets. General happiness.
With hindsight, we know what was going on, but a lot of people at the time didn't know quite.
They didn't. But the London Collegiate School invited me back. I don't know, 10 years now. I went to the Daffodil.
Founders Day.
Yes, and so the stairs that she painted are still there, and I mean it was a great occasion.
And I mean she had that art school built. I mean you say the school gave her the freedom. She bullied. I mean she made people do things.
Yeah. She was very tough, wasn't she? Getting you to do things.
She must. Yeah.
And she insisted on a female architect to build, because it was Philip Bottomley's wife, Judith, I think, wasn't it? But I may have got that wrong, but I mean she definitely chose women, so she was a feminist in that.
She was, yes.
And that she would make sure a woman got a chance.
No, she was a feminist, really, yes. But
not
not as
And she did like young men as well.
Young men, I think.
Well, because they were strong and useful. She liked useful. Yes, they had to be strong and tough and useful.
I remember she used to say, if we were talking too much, having tea or something, she'd say, well, that won't make the baby a new bonnet. And I'm sure there must have been other things she said like that, to kind of get you on the move without actually, bullying you or pressurising you. It would just
the joke,
make a joke of
it. I mean, she was often lying up on the bed listening to the Archers, actually. Very good at giving everybody else a job. But we love doing it.
I talked to my sister and she said she remembered going there in about 1979 in a snowstorm, carrying her son in a buggy up to Furlongs, and Peggy talking about this thing that because of having the council studio, she was part of the lease was that she had to do some teaching work. And Peggy had told us that she tried to get the pensioners or whatever group it was, and the men were very resistant painting. They didn't want to paint, that was too arty, but they didn't mind knitting. So that was why she got them all knitting. Knitting was okay.
Knitting the pictures.
Yes, and they did those wonderful applique cushions, didn't they?
Yes, and the bedspread.
Yes.
I went up to Barrow with Peggy. I took Peggy up to Barrow with my 4 children in a camper van. And we arrived, I didn't know about big roads in those days, it was, so I thought it was going to take longer than it did. So we arrived in Cumbria, the Lake Districts, and we were a bit early because we were going to stay with the Andersons. And so I took the first left and then I took the first right because the children needed a walk. And so I wanted to go above fence line. I got there, parked the van, said to Peggy, we'll go for an hour and a half, have a rest and enjoy being quiet. When we came back, there was this voice over the hedge saying, here I am. And it was, the house was where in the war she had used the knitting machines. Now how on earth did I arrive there for her? I mean, quite extraordinary. But,
because her family hit hard times, she had to come home from school every day and work the knitting machine because her mother was making knitted clothes to keep them.
Yes, you're right.
Because her father was a railway engineer and they lived in South America. Peggy was actually born in Chile and lived there till she was 6, but then the First World War disrupted all that and they came back to England, and then he never really managed to get a good job again. But they'd lived like royalty in Chile. But it's interesting, the Chile thing, because I mean this sense of festivals and colour and everything really relates back to that.
Well, I did want to talk a bit more about her work. I was going to ask you, Tanya, what do you think is the significance of Peggy's move from painting to kind of more industrial wallpaper and tile designs, to Peggy, but also in a wider craft context?
Well, I think it's interesting, at the college, Royal College of Art, she went into the painting school and then moved to the design school, because I think that's where the action was at that point, actually. The painting was a bit backward, but under the sort of aegis of Paul Nash, there were amazing things going on in the painting school, in the design school. But quite a few
women allowed to. Were women accepted at the Royal College?
Yeah, I think
she must have been one of the first.
Well, I think almost from the beginning, actually, because they were part of the schools of design that accepted women. But it's interesting that she and Enid Marks moved more in the direction of pattern and not illustration, not a sort of painting that was a bit more exciting than the painting in the painting schools with figures like Revilius. You could call it illustrational painting, but it was more actually connected to what was going on in Europe. But this move towards pattern and textile and I think makes her sort of fit in with all these other incredible women working. She didn't really start making pattern until I think sort of after the war, really. But
Which war?
Second World War.
No, she was doing it before.
Was she?
Was doing it before then.
But
Carry on talking.
I sort of
my book.
In my mind, she sort of hangs together with people like Ethel Marriott and Phyllis Barron and Dorothy Larcher. And in fact, Phyllis Barron and Dorothy Larcher are quite close to her in the way they printed. There's always this feeling of an uneven ground, which makes whatever they printed alive. They're printing on textile. But I think these extraordinary women set up kind of workshops and groups that were very informal and weren't in any way institutionalized. And in the case of Peggy, it's really, well, there's this lovely phrase used by Jenny Sorkin in her book Live Form, which is about the special contribution that women made to ceramics in the States, but it's sort of engaged social practice, which now is a very fashionable thing, but that these women were doing that, especially Peggy, because now you think of someone like Theaster Gates with his amazing workshops in Chicago, which work in deprived communities and draw people in by getting them making stuff, particularly ceramics. But Peggy was doing that, or Grisdale Arts up in the Lake District, but Peggy was sort of doing this sort of thing informally. And in that way, we can take her right back to the early days of the Art Workers Guild, where they were fighting against institutions like the Royal Academy or the Royal Institute of Architects, and the idea of examining, an institution regulating what you did.
Emanating William Morris, really.
Yes, in a way, yes.
I mean, he was
And figures like Letherby, who wanted to appreciate all kinds of making activities. So he gave some of his best talks to the women's institutes, and he wrote essays about the beauty of bread making. And so, of course, she couldn't have been a member of the Art Workers Guild because women weren't allowed to be members until 1964. But as a radical figure, she sort of fits in with the very early years of the Art Workers Guild and the early years of the arts and crafts movement. And yet she was working at her best at a period where, in some ways, art became a bit arid. I was rather fascinated. She knew Maurice de Saumarez, who wrote this very important book, Basic Design, that was used in all art schools, based on the Bauhaus 4 course. But basically, Basic Design sort of stripped everything away and you began from zero. And she called it a filthy book. Because it sort of
he lived at Fergal for a while and wondered if she had these caravans.
Exactly. Well, there he was writing this filthy book,
Yeah.
which stripped out all the sort of past and
the human.
the things that were all in her curriculum that she drew up for the school children at North London Collegiate.
I think she picked up a lot in Russia. I think the idea of that social use of art, I mean, she and Pearl Binder picked up on those sort of, wonderful lithograph books that were very sort of stylized. And then just of course, they all went into the design school. I mean, Peggy went for financial reasons because she thought she'd earn a better living by doing illustration. When she ended up teaching, I mean, David Bomford, who is here, who took her around the National Gallery a lot, always complained she just looked at the frames. She was this was part of this whole general, and she was absolutely right, because Baxendorf and people, wrote about the sort of early Renaissance period. The people who made the geometric frames were paid more than the painters sometimes, and I think she picked up on that design, and she would get us at school in our Gothic year to actually make designs based on medieval towns, which tend to be made on the square and the triangle, a bit like the tiles. And then she developed that into, because we did communal projects, you each did a bit, that turned into almost the tile designs. And then she decided, that if she designed tiles in units like that, a plain square or a half circle, you could build up a whole mural like that. And also she's, Eric and Terza were living at Furlongs with her for a bit, and Terza was doing the marvellous, all the different things, the designs, the marble papers, and they were doing wallpapers because Borden and Revilius were doing wallpapers as well, and doing a lot of design things.
No, her wallpapers, came.
And the wallpapers came out of the tiles because the architect said, can you show us how can you print it out to show us how these tiles work? And then the modernist architect said, hey, I'd like this as wallpaper in my house. So that's how the wallpaper came out of the tiles. And then eventually it went back to being more sort of this idea of, if you've got a vineyard, do you want grapes on your wallpaper? Then it began to get more, and this is how the world went.
And she made birds eat the grapes, so we had to reject that one. But when we went to Dorset, we found that she's had worked for Carter's, designed.
So she was
for 5 years?
And those were all the tiles made for for FRS
York.
Yeah.
Well,
and they are fantastic.
Were they all done at?
They were done by Carters at
Right,
Poole.
Carters.
and they
yes.
paid her a retainer, so she was sort of not quite, I don't think she was a member of the Society of Industrial Designers, but they paid her a
No,
retainer
she perhaps should have been.
to be involved with it, because Eric Willis was doing those ceramics for Wedgwood, and it was the beginning almost in a pre-Grayson Perry of actually silk screening designs
Yes, I mean they were.
onto pottery. And
yeah.
she went down to Poole and actually, you know, with some sticky stuff and, you know, her designs and
Yeah.
sorted out a new process,
Yes,
basically.
it
She was just so
I mean, it was,
practical.
yeah.
And this tied into how she enabled you, because she enabled you to feel you didn't have to actually have amazing skills. What do I need to do? How do I do it? Work it out.
Yeah.
You know, and that's
Yeah.
how she lived.
Yes.
There is that lovely phrase coined by Michael Saylor. He's writing about Frank Pick and the London Underground, medieval modern, and I think that's where, you know, Peggy was a sort of medieval modern in that
Yeah.
she
Yeah.
believed in doing things communally,
Yeah.
and so I found it quite extraordinary that this enormous tile piece she did for the Brussels World Fair was really done with school children.
Yes, it was from one of these projects doing a medieval town,
Yes,
but hers
in
wasn't medieval. It was
1958, you know, it's sort of.
which, going back to feminism on International Women's Day, she was not invited to. And I make the point in my book, I show the photograph, there's a photograph with some unknown man going like this against the mural. She didn't even get a ticket, she paid for herself to get on the boat at New Haven and go to Brussels and see this thing that she designed.
Yeah.
And the ones she designed for the architects, are they still in situ? Can you go to these schools and...
Yes, there's somebody called
Oh,
Katie
yeah.
Arbour who did a whole book.
Oh, yes.
She went round and photographed
Oh,
a lot
okay.
of, some was sort of hidden. I mean, she always said tiles, just, you know, they're really, really strong, you know.
Yes.
But she did, of course, do tiles for London Underground, you know. But again, she said, you know, I'm going to design them as frames to go around the posters in the Underground, you know. So she designed sort of borders, again, just sort of squares.
I know that.
And she did industrial glass for Gatwick Airport, which isn't there any longer because it was kind of phase one Gatwick Airport.
Yeah.
But she actually designed silk screening on glass because she wanted sort of like frost buttons. So I mean, she was immensely practical and really clever at working with people to
Yes, yes.
make a new process.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, going back to education, this is what I found at university, is there's only so much you can teach art as a course at school without teaching art as part of your life, art for life. So for her to show everyone that art was not just something someone older than you taught you, it's something you teach each other, you play around, you paint next to each other, and you learn from each other. I think that's so important because I just didn't feel that at all at university, but I ended up being taught more by my colleagues and my
Yeah.
friends
Yeah.
than actually my teachers, because you're just all learning from each other, from each other's creative processes, and I guess that was what Peggy was so amazing at.
On the political front, I suppose she was a member of the Artists International Association. So there she would work sort of in groups with people. This was perhaps before she discovered her genius for pattern. So she was doing more sort of figurative, political
found
sort
a
of.
date for the time.
I was going to ask you as well, Tanya, and I'm going to quote you here, so apologies. You say in Carolyn's book, in your introduction, you say, "We would have to go back to William Morris to find such a fresh and sylvan gift for flat pattern." I wondered what you thought made her designs so original and so effective, just talking specifically about what made her work so incredible.
Yes. Well, it starts in a modernist architecture setting, so there's a much plainer patterns. So she has an extraordinary gift for sort of light and dark, and the actual way you put together pattern, which I know whether it sort of is like a gift,
It is, yeah.
because
I
who
think
taught
so.
it to her, you know, it came. But then she, perhaps to do with the syllabus at the school, the way she brought into heraldry, what I see as the more Marx side of things. She just had a wonderful sort of, it was a kind of neo-romanticism perhaps, a sort of gift for finding things that symbolise a whole sense of what a place should be about. If it's going to be wallpapered, like suns and moons, and beasts and birds. But of course, she was living in a time when wallpaper was really not
Grim.
Not sort of admired in a sense. It was a sort of bit of a no-no. So she was out of step again. In
Well, the tiles were replacing, I mean, women, you know, these modernist architects fell on her tiles because women were hand painting like Victoria, you know, ruining their eyesight, doing these sort of flowery patterns on tiles until Peggy did hers. And Pearl Binder included Peggy in her book Magic Symbols of the World, and she showed the black and white ones and the diagonals and said, you know, this is really what you would find in a sort of, you know, not Paleolithic, but you know, it's going back to her global approach to things. I think she just absorbed a sense.
And how did the trip to Indonesia affect? I mean, that must have been seeing art as part of everyday life and the kind of ceremony and making special objects for
Well, one thing that's really important is, I mean, you know, the British Museum says there were revolutions in Indonesia after she came back, a lot of stuff got washed away. You know, things that we call corn dollies were actually a language, and she learnt, you know, how to make these complicated things. And, you know, I keep trying to get somebody to publish a book of all this, and she wrote a whole hand-painted coloured book about Bali with really important information about. And then when she was there, she stayed for a year and she was drawing up a syllabus for them and saying, you know, you shouldn't, they were saying at first you were trying to keep us backwards, and she was saying, no, we need to look at you, otherwise we'll all go mad. What you've got is fantastic. Why are you trying to paint like a Westerner or put Mickey Mouse on your waste paper bins when you have lovely woven grass ones?
And you're saying that they've got some in the British Museum that she brought back?
No, they haven't.
Oh,
it's all in her book, but they have seen it and said how
Yes.
important it is. But can I get anybody to publish a book? Just, you know, I've been trying for decades to get it. You know,
so
the
anybody here who knows has any connections, contacts with publishers.
So I also want to talk a bit about her legacy and what we can learn from her now. I mean, for me, what I learned from her is her kind of joy and romance that she brought to her life and her work, and also even modernism and politics. You even say she could have been quite naive with her politics in the hopefulness, kind of the romance of it. But I think that's amazing for me because there's only so far you can get with the science bit, but to have that kind of zest for life and joy in possibilities and what you could do with your work and what you could think about and ideas, just that kind of passion for and belief in ideas is something that has really inspired me. But I wanted to ask what all of you thought Peggy would have wanted her legacy to be, and whether you think her legacy in real life reflects this.
Well, for me, that thing when she was talking about Indonesia, what she learnt there was they made all this fantastic stuff, and then the kingdom, you know, various events, they just burnt the lot. So I mean, they made food for festivals and they ate it, and I think I'm finding this really inspiring now, because I think, you know, we're all obsessed with kind of making things last, and I'm thinking, you know, we're ruining the planet. Is there a future? I think she was so what's the word, you know, thinking ahead, and what she said was amazing, that they had the confidence they would do more, so they didn't care about it because they would just do it all better, something different. And I think we can learn a lot from that. And different doesn't mean sort of trying to be, it's not trying to be, now everybody's being individualistic and different. We're in end times, you can't be everything that's been done before. Artists are always learning from each other. We need more collaboration. It's a joy of doing it, and it's the social content of what you are doing, and it's not about making things that will last.
I think when you think of the great range of people she taught, like soldiers, school children, old age pensioners, the people of Barra, she sort of encouraged, the way she encouraged people. And it makes me think of some of the earlier books written by Richard Sennett, in particular a book he wrote called Respect, and I must read this because it's so beautiful. Because he's talking about problems of inequality and the difficulty people have to maintain respect in an incredibly unequal world, where salaries are so vastly different. And he writes, and he's thinking about his own childhood, which was very deprived in a part of Chicago. He says, "The best protection I'm able to imagine against the evils of invidious comparison is the experience of the ability I've called craft work. And the reason for this is simple. Craft work certainly doesn't banish invidious comparison to the work of others, but it does refocus a person's energies to get an act right in itself for oneself. The craftsman or craftswoman can sustain their self-respect in an unequal world." And I think she gave people that possibility.
It was a fantastic time, I think, in the 70s. That we were all going out with great energy, and it is somewhat different from today. But something we went to last night, my son put on an exhibition down in Hampshire, and I was talking to some people. It was about migration from Ghana to England, of all sorts of things. We had contact with Ghana by telephone on the wall, and then a whole lot of Ghanaians came and played music, drumming, and it was to do with the nightjar migrating. But I was talking to one of the wives, and she was saying, in England, I was wondering why we didn't dance. It took us a long time to dance. We're always striving to be the best. Where in Ghana, it's a community thing, and you're successful if you get the youngsters to be with you, and that's really, I think, with Peggy, we were a community, and we all, shivers somewhat.
Yes.
The dew pond.
Yeah.
It was wonderful summer evenings. They were just, amazing.
Really simple.
And yes, very simple. And we've lost that simplicity. Yeah.
I remember Ursula saying, which was a thing I can imagine Peggy saying as well, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. She was painting birds for Christmas cards, and she was just doing, like she would paint on a pot with a brush, little birds, and not good. Well, this one's okay. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. And I thought, well, that's a really good way of looking at it. You've got to try and make an effort and see what happens.
Yeah. I would like people's seconds, actually, because they've always got a bit more passion.
Yes.
The correctness is too much.
Yes.
But that passion, to have that passion.
That was the other thing about her education, was that, when I've done residence schools, they always tell you who's good at art. She had no trouble with that. Everything we did was not individual. She would divide things up, or she'd give you a sort of a design brief of a shape, and then everybody did something, and she would hang it all together, and she would be really vigorous about encouraging you. And then the idea was that it all looked good. It wasn't one person's done it best, and that was just ingrained in you. And I think that is a really good thing to give children. Just try.
Yes, I was horrified when I did quite a few workshops. You won't go into a school and they'll tell you who are the naughty children. I said, I don't want to know.
Yes.
That everybody is equal. And it's often those naughty children that were the best at doing play.
My sister used to do workshops in schools, and she said that she always, when they told her which were the naughty children, she would get them to come and help her.
Yes.
And they would learn how to do it and then show everybody else, and they would be so pleased
Yeah.
that they behaved better than anybody
That's right.
else and
That's
produced fantastic work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really child abuse the way we
Yes.
bring children up. I went and did a resident in Hampden Park, you know, and I was doing woodcuts, and they were like, no, they can't have knives, they'll kill each other. And I was like, held my ground. And then these kids would come up to me afterwards and tell me about what they did in the shed with their granddad, you know, in their tools.
Yes.
And they were so proud, because I said to the teachers, well, what's this on the walls? They had stuff from the 40s and 50s in glass cases where, you know, boys mostly, but boys and girls were allowed to make things with tools. Of course, you teach children to use tools. Peggy just
we
said, I
have a-
don't want any blood, you know, but she told you a few various things you do, you know. You only cut yourself once and then you don't do it again. I mean, I think denying children
Yeah.
being able to do that, and they were so proud, these boys, and I felt so sorry for them, because, you know, they said to me, you know, half the people in children in Hampden Park had never been out of Hampden Park, but
No,
they
we
went and
had
made
a
things in
similar-
the shed,
yeah.
but there they were being made to work on computers, you know.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's really sad.
What do you think, for me, because we've been talking a lot about how amazing Peggy was to know, but obviously, unfortunately, I didn't get to know her. So what do you think someone like me and maybe a lot of the people in this room can take away from her having not known her? What can we take with us through our lives and our work that she will have brought to us? Anyone?
That's a really difficult question.
Yeah.
I mean, she had a lot of sorrows in her life, as I think you
She had a
said,
lot of
and yet she had
difficulties,
that
but-
basic faith in joy, didn't
Yeah.
she, in a way, and that you make joy in a way, and you make it through getting together
Yes.
with other
I
people.
mean, that's what I was going to say. The enjoyment
Yeah.
of being.
Yeah.
She did have a lot of problems.
Mhm.
You know, we have painted perhaps a bit of a good. Well, we remember the lovely sides, but it was a difficult time of life. Then, you know, but she made good of it.
I mean, she was desolate about her divorce and her son dying, all these
That's
things,
right.
but she
She had
turned
a
them
lot
all
of-
into
a lot
a
of-
positive,
yeah.
you know.
But we all have baggage, don't we?
Yeah.
And I think this is one of the things of life. One has to accept the baggage and, you know, and learn to enjoy it as well.
Yeah.
There's a good world out there.
And do projects with friends and try things out. And yes.
Well, maybe this is a good time to open it up to the audience and ask if anyone has any questions for our panelists.
Can I make a
Yeah, go for it.
observation? I knew Peggy for very many years, and I'm an old friend of Carolyn's there. And I want to back up a couple of things that Carolyn said. And one is the importance of Chile, that she grew up first 6 years of her life in Chile. She spoke about it often. And her father was David Angus, a great railway engineer, and there's a wonderful biography of him, which is available. But she spoke about it often, and my wife is Chilean, and they sang Chilean lullabies together. And she loved singing. She had a wonderfully fruity chuckle. You were asking and those are the sort of things I remember. And then, as Carolyn also said, Peggy would come and visit me in my restoration studio at the National Gallery, and I would have famous pictures on the easels, which she utterly ignored, and she would go straight for the stack of frames leaning up against the wall and look at the patterns and the carvings and the designs of the picture frames. So you never quite knew what she was going to do when she came into those sort of contexts. And finally, she happily, I introduced her to the director of the National Portrait Gallery, and 2 of her paintings are in the National Portrait Gallery collection. One is her portrait of Jim Richards, and the other is the Ramsay MacDonald family, and they're often on view, I think, if you go there. So it was just wonderful being around her and just giving her slightly different perspectives if one could, but she always gave you the different perspectives. So Thank you.
She did a really good portrait of Piper, didn't she? Because they were really good friends. Where's that one? That's not in the National Portrait Gallery, is it?
I think
Yes,
that might be as
I
well.
think it is actually.
It's actually one of her better pictures, you know, because I mean she wasn't a great painter, but that one of John Piper is really good. The cat on his lap, and it's slightly stylized. It's really good.
Wasn't she quite a good domestic painter? I mean, that's what they were doing at that time. No?
Well,
No. Okay.
I mean, I'm so brought up by her that, you know, I'm very happy to be not bothered about the painting. So she felt she was being made to paint like Michelangelo. She always said, oh, but I want to paint like Michelangelo, but she patently wasn't going to really. And I think, you know, it was lucky that innate design came out. But not just the design, the way of doing art in different ways, you know,
Yeah.
not a picture on the wall.
It was the colour at that period was quite dark, but they were always full of passion. And
Her drawings were full of, her drawings were full of interest, I thought.
I remember wonderful paving stones in round furlongs where she'd somehow used broken crockery set into
we did
cement.
some of those. I did some of those.
But she must have inspired you doing them, and there was a gap in the wall
project.
where you had to climb through, which had hands made out of broken crockery on either side for you to put your hands on. And I remember a cockerel with feathers that were the edges of plates.
Yeah, I think I might have done that.
Any more questions?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
I remember Diana, you met me in Cumbria.
Oh, right.
I'm one of the, Anderson, but Swales.
Right.
So Anne Anderson is my mother.
Right.
Peggy's my
Oh,
grandpa.
fantastic. Yes. It was an amazing, you know, for me, I've
And
never
you-
travelled.
But you also were a huge influence.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear.
You also were a huge influence.
Right.
to
So
Lisa.
that's fantastic that you're there.
But I also remember the harps that were made for her, because I made a case for one of them so she could travel with her harp.
Oh, right.
Oh, good.
I had a career in costume construction, so I sort of made it up as I went along. Somebody put it slightly differently. You work it out as you go along.
You're along, yeah.
So many projects you were given by Peggy, it would be, work it out.
Yes, right, yeah, that's right. That's right.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
brilliant. Yeah.
Yes, in Barra, she wanted my husband to make a bed over the, it's just a bothy, but actually he made it so well. She was really cross, but there was no electricity or anything. He was putting red hot pokers into the fire and actually plunging holes through huge slabs of wood and then putting huge screws in. But I mean, it has actually survived and nobody's fallen through it.
Yeah.
But interestingly, she's already done it rather too well. She could be perverse.
Yeah.
Any more questions? No? Yeah.
Any more stories?
Yeah.
I did read that Furlongs was left as decorative almost as Charleston. How is it now?
Well, the difference between Furlongs and Charleston, apart from the size and the lack of amenities,
And the
is
staff?
that she was an illegal subtenant of a tenant farmer. So there's a lot of stuff on the website as how did I allow Furlongs to sort of, But I point this out, and I mean Lord Hampden was still trying to get her out in her 80s.
So the Downs estate didn't appreciate the legacy that she might have left.
I think they were quite angry. There's no actual road, there's no legal footpath to Furlongs, and they didn't want. And, I don't know if it's Chatham House rules here, but I mean, he used to take his children and say, "This would be a nice little Wendy house for you," which annoyed me intensely, And in the end, when he married again, his partner went and lived there, and it was done up. So I can't bear to go now. So I haven't seen what it looks like inside, but I guess it has a bathroom.
Yeah, it was different. I did some tiles for when it, something happened to it. But another friend I have in Dorset knew the people who had rented it for a stage. He was I'd have to do some work to find out his name, but he was another engraver.
There is somebody living here who wants to meet me, and I started just reminding me, and I think he's in the music industry or something, but I think he is now. Somebody here must have told me about him. So I think there's somebody who is interested, a bit like Charlie's interested in resurrecting
this would be a lovely person to be there
hopefully,
to enjoy.
yes,
yes,
and I think he's interested in art. I think he's using the old estate office in Glynde as a studio, I think.
Right.
I think he does artwork
Well,
as well as
that
music.
would be.
So we
yes,
should
I have
thought to try
an
and
owl
invite him.
card, a lovely
Yes.
owl card of his. That I didn't bring it. Yeah.
So
Well,
you
it's
know who he is.
It's a shame there aren't any sort of house museums
Mm.
of women designers and artists. I can only think of Barbara Hepworth actually. Whereas, well, there aren't that many in Britain anyway, because there are loads in Russia, strangely, and France. But well, perhaps not strangely.
I think Russia probably appreciated it as artists, but I think strangely Russia, they actually know the power of art, which is why they try and control their artists, whereas we kind of, don't try and control our artists, but neither do we take them very seriously, do we?
But is the town art gallery? I mean, I've tried during COVID. I've put some of her drawings all in a case, and what's his name? The guy that was at the records office in Lewes.
Oh, Chris Whittick.
Yes, he was very keen to have some more of her work. But the people who are now, because he's retired, but he is a volunteer, or he was a couple of years ago a volunteer. So I keep meaning to take this case of work that I have of hers.
Oh, right. Well, I'm sure. Yes, I'm trying to get
But
something else.
I never know whether it should be at the Sussex Records Office or at the Town Art Gallery.
Well, I think it should be at the Keep, but I think they're under cuts and things. It's maybe not a safer place than we think.
So
go and look at the stuff there now. I mean, there's
yes, they're
all
not so
Peggy's
interesting. I mean,
archives,
she's saying, well, it's got to be small, it's got to be,
yes. Well, there's an awful lot of her stuff.
Yeah.
there.
So it's
Have we
difficult,
got any
yeah.
more questions from anyone?
I think this is Peggy's legacy, us talking about her and passing it on
Yes.
and other people
It
being
is, it
interested.
is.
I wouldn't. I think furlongs without Peggy would be dead as a dodo. Actually, I mean, I think it's her force of energy.
You're right. It is discussion and including her, and well, again, it's what she has passed on to us, isn't it? And it's her inspiration. Her inspiration.
Yeah, people are picking it up. From
Yeah, and it's really nice that the young are picking it up.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
I think it was inspiring because we grew up around her, being Downhill's daughters. Her love of creating. We were very shy and very quiet, but watched her, and I just, I realised she really changed my life, because whether she was designing a tile from the Bay of Tapestry, or showing us how to block print wallpaper, or up in Barra painting on the pebbles, everyone had to do it, and she sort of glowed. There was a sort of hum about her. Or she painted Mum and Emily and me as the three Graces. And it horrified me when I was young, And there was Peggy she lost her false tooth as she was doing it. She stayed overnight, and we were all sent to look for the false tooth. She was frightening, I hardly, she was very bossy. And it's only now in my 50s I look back and I think, it was incredible, because she was a woman, she knew her worth. She knew how important what she was doing was. And we were just one of many children, and you didn't feel particularly singled out, but she really told you, and you really saw it from what she was doing. Or she'd sit us down at the kitchen table and do portraits of us. Or, it was only later when we were never allowed to watch television at break. But they eventually got a television, but we weren't allowed to watch it. Mum was out once, and I saw a programme about Peggy talking about her portraits in the National Portrait Gallery. I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't know she did portraits, and that's what I now do. And that. But I said, Mum, look, Peggy does portraits. Couldn't you get her to do one of you? And Mum said, oh, she's always wanting to do one, but I never have the time. So I did actually arrange to go up to Camden, and Peggy had lunch, and we were chatting, and then we sat her down. Mum was sitting on the chaise, longing to have her, and Peggy said, it was always getting people to do things, wasn't it? She said, I'll do a portrait of your mum if you do a portrait of me.
Very happy.
So I was sitting drawing, and after about 3 minutes, because we'd had wine at lunch, Peggy was asleep like that. Mum, she's asleep. Can you wake her up? Because I was desperate. And that happened several times, and then we couldn't do it. But yeah, she was an amazing person. So,
but she was ferocious, I can tell you, a portrait story. She bought a drawing of me, of me drawing her on a train up to Barra. And she didn't like the face, and she bought a picture from me, but every time she had people round at furlong, she'd say, look, she hasn't done this face right, will you have a go? So, get rubbed out, do you remember? And then she'd get something, and then she didn't like that one. In the end, the paper was sort of more or less ripped away. As an artist, there were kids at school terrified of her because she used to run their paintings under the tap. She would not last in our education system today for 1 minute. They would all be suing her. But if you really want to be an artist, it was most brilliant. I have absolutely no egotism about my work whatsoever. And I mean, you shouldn't as an artist. She gave me the confidence. But that's different from being egotistic. You just need to they always say, isn't it, kill your darlings, I always say to my students, if that's a bit of your work you think's the best bit, that bit's got to go, and then then it'll fall into place and you'll make it better.
She was quite harsh. She was scathing about us as children when we'd go up to Barra in the mum's camper van, and she would sing songs about wicked children, these wicked children, not helping their mother enough.
She was a pretty terrible mother. I sympathise with her daughter.
Yes, because the work was so important to her, I think. And on a bigger level, communicating what art was more important than parenting.
Right, well, shall we wrap this up then? Thank you so much for you all for being here, and thank you so much for you guys. Wonderful Carolyn, Tanya, Di and Sarah, you've been amazing. I'm sure everyone is so pleased to have got to chat to you. So thank you so much.
We're very pleased we've got together.
Thank you.
Charlie for hosting.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, my children were terrified. I was writing this book on the day that my youngest Harry on the door to say, no, don't let it